He thought he was protecting his land, the same creek his grandfather used to fish from, the same soil that held generations of his family's sweat and pride. But to the homeowners association, he was just a problem. One morning, he woke to the sound of machines, and by sundown, the creek that gave his property life was buried under concrete. Weeks later, the same neighbors who cheered for the construction found their homes sinking into mud, yet no one wanted to admit what they'd done, or who they'd done it to. What happens when nature itself demands justice? For 20 years, Isaiah Cole had lived on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place that promised peace, order, and community. He bought his modest 2-story house with pride, believing he'd finally found stability for himself and his daughter, Layla. Behind his home ran a small creek, calm and steady, where frogs croaked at night and willow trees swayed in the wind. It wasn't much, but to Isaiah, it was sacred. That creek had history, more than anyone around him seemed to know. It was part of his family's land long before the suburb existed. His grandfather used to tell stories about hauling buckets of cool water from it during summers, so dry the earth cracked open. Isaiah grew up hearing that the creek fed the land, not just with water, but with life. And in a way, it had fed him too. When Isaiah moved into this newly developed subdivision, the homeowners association promised community harmony and environmental care. They handed out glossy brochures with pictures of pristine lawns and smiling families. Isaiah wanted that life for Layla, somewhere she could feel safe, somewhere she wouldn't have to question if she belonged. At first, everything seemed fine. He mowed his lawn, waved to neighbors, paid his dues on time. Layla played by the creek with her friends, skipping rocks and chasing dragonflies. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, flowing freely through their backyards before bending out of sight into the woods beyond. But as months passed, Isaiah began noticing looks, subtle, polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. He was the only black homeowner in the neighborhood, and while no one ever said anything outright, there was a distance. Conversations would quiet when he joined in. HOA meetings would forget to send him notices. Small things, easy to overlook, but they piled up like drops of rain before a flood. Then came the first complaint. A letter, neatly folded in his mailbox. Your backyard runoff is causing excess water near adjacent properties. Please address immediately. Isaiah frowned at it. The creek had been there long before any of these homes. It wasn't his runoff. It was nature doing what it always had. Still, he replied politely, explaining that the creek was natural and had never flooded in all his years there. Weeks passed. More letters came, each one a little sterner. Failure to comply may result in fines. Neighbor complaints are increasing. Isaiah started attending HOA meetings to clear things up, but the reception was cold. The board, mostly older white homeowners, dismissed his explanations with bureaucratic smiles. We'll look into it, they'd say, before swiftly moving on to landscaping budgets and paint color rules. It wasn't just about the creek anymore. It was about him. One evening, Isaiah stood by the water's edge, watching the sunset spill orange over the rippling surface. He remembered his grandfather's words. They can build all they want, but you can't concrete over truth. That night, he noticed strange survey flags planted near the creek. The next morning, a notice was taped to his door. An HOA improvement project. No details. Just a promise to resolve drainage issues affecting community safety. Something felt wrong. Neighbors whispered when he walked by. Construction trucks began parking down the street. Isaiah's heart sank as he realized they weren't fixing the creek. They were coming for it, and deep down, he knew this wasn't about water at all. It was about control. About erasing something and someone. that didn't fit the picture they wanted to keep. He didn't know it yet, but what they were about to do would destroy everything they were trying to protect and expose the ugly truth buried beneath their perfect lawns. The sound came early that morning, the low growl of engines, the grind of metal. Isaiah rushed to his window and saw them. 3 cement trucks, a backhoe, and men in bright orange vests. The HOA banner flapped in the wind, nailed to a post. Community Creek Reinforcement Project. His chest tightened. He hadn't approved anything. No one had asked him. He ran outside, still in his work clothes, mud soaking his shoes as he approached the machines. "Hey, what are you doing?" he shouted over the noise. One of the workers barely looked up. "Just following orders. HOA said we're clearing this drainage hazard." Hazard. That word hung in the air like a lie he couldn't swallow. The creek wasn't a hazard. It was home, history, life. He called the HOA president, Mark Ellison, a man with a voice that always dripped with artificial calm. "Mark, you can't just fill it in. That water keeps the soil balanced. You'll cause flooding." Mark sighed, as if he were the one being wronged. "Isaiah, this has been discussed. You've received notices. We're protecting property values." Property values. 2 words that always seemed to mean something else when directed at him. By noon, the first load of concrete was pouring into the creek bed. Gray, wet, final. Isaiah stood there helpless, feeling the rumble beneath his feet as the ground that had carried his family's history was buried alive. He wanted to shout, to stop them, to call the police, but who would listen? To them, he was just the angry black man causing trouble. Neighbors watched from their porches. Some pretended not to notice. Others whispered, satisfied. A few recorded it, but no one intervened. By evening, the creek was gone. The air felt heavier that night, thick with silence and something else. A warning. Isaiah walked the edge of what used to be running water, now a stretch of drying concrete. Layla stood beside him, her small hand gripping his. "Daddy, why would they do that?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. Days later, the rain came. A steady drizzle at first, then a downpour that lasted hours. Water pooled where the creek once flowed, unable to escape. The ground softened, grass turned to sludge, and yards began to sink. Isaiah watched as muddy water crept toward the pristine fences of the same people who had cheered for the project. Within days, driveways cracked, flower beds drowned, and basements filled with stagnant water. But when he tried to warn them, to tell them it was because they'd killed the creek, they turned on him. "It's your property that caused this," one neighbor shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "You should have maintained that ditch." Another added, "You people never take responsibility, always blaming someone else." Those words cut deeper than the flood. The HOA fined him again for failing to prevent erosion. The irony was unbearable. They destroyed the creek, caused the flooding, and now they blamed him for it. He documented everything: photos, timestamps, reports from county records showing the creek's natural flow. But when he brought them to the local board, they brushed him off. "This is a neighborhood matter, Mr. Cole. We don't get involved in civil disputes." Civil disputes. As if it were just a disagreement over a fence line, not a slow, deliberate act of erasure. Isaiah's frustration turned into resolve. He began reaching out, environmental groups, local reporters, anyone who would listen. Most never called back. One journalist showed mild interest, but dropped the story after reviewing the neighborhood's reputation. Still, the water kept rising. One night, thunder shook the windows. Isaiah looked outside and saw waves of brown water crawling up his driveway, swallowing the lawns that once looked perfect in HOA brochures. And then a crash. A neighbor's retaining wall gave way, collapsing into the swampy mess. the same neighbor who'd called him a drainage hazard. By morning, the subdivision was a disaster zone. Yards ruined, foundations shifting, cars stuck in mud. The once proud HOA scrambled for answers, holding emergency meetings Isaiah was suddenly invited to attend, now that they needed him, but he didn't go. Not yet. He stood at his window, watching nature reclaim what they tried to bury. For the first time, he didn't feel powerless. The water was speaking for him now, and it wasn't done yet. Because sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes with the rain. The storm that night was unlike any the town had seen in decades. Rain slammed against rooftops, wind howled through the trees, and the sky pulsed with flashes of white light that illuminated the chaos below. The subdivision, once the HOA's pride, was now drowning in its own arrogance. Isaiah stood ankle-deep in murky water, flashlight trembling in his hand. The creek, buried months ago beneath tons of concrete, was fighting its way back. Water gushed from underground cracks, roaring like something alive. The current tore through backyards, ripping fences from the ground, swallowing manicured lawns whole. Sirens wailed in the distance, but no one was coming fast enough. The neighborhood's perfect symmetry, gone. He could see neighbors scrambling in the flood, shouting for help. Cars half submerged, children crying, lights flickering out one by one. And in the middle of it all stood Mark Ellison, the HOA president, waist-deep in water, screaming orders no one could hear. The concrete walls they built to protect themselves were now crumbling around them. Isaiah wanted to look away, to save what little he could. But something inside him wouldn't let go, not this time. He walked toward Mark through the rising water, each step heavy, deliberate. Lightning flashed, revealing the fear in Mark's face. "This is what you wanted," Isaiah shouted over the storm. "You killed the creek! Now it's coming for you!" Mark stumbled, the current dragging at his legs. We were trying to fix it," he yelled, choking as water splashed into his mouth. "Fix it?" Isaiah's voice cracked. "You buried history. You buried me." Another surge hit, a wall of water breaking through where the creek used to run. It slammed into Mark, knocking him off his feet. Isaiah lunged instinctively, grabbing his arm, pulling him toward the porch of a nearby house. For a second their eyes locked, the oppressor and the outcast, both at the mercy of the same force. When they reached safety, Mark collapsed, coughing, shivering. "We didn't know it would get this bad," he gasped. Isaiah stared at the man, soaked and trembling, a man who had signed the papers, approved the project, silenced his warnings. "You never wanted to know," he said quietly. "You just wanted control." In that moment, the entire block behind them gave way. The sound was deafening, concrete cracking, water roaring, earth splitting open. The creek had reclaimed its path. Isaiah turned to see it. The ghost of the waterway carving through the neighborhood once more, washing over everything built to erase it. Fences, driveways, all gone. Yet the flow was beautiful, almost merciful, as if nature was restoring balance in its own violent way. As the rain eased, a strange stillness followed. The sirens faded. The water began to settle, leaving behind a shattered illusion of perfection. Isaiah stood there, soaked and silent, as dawn crept over the wreckage. The neighborhood looked unrecognizable, a wasteland of mud and ruin. For once, no one could deny what had happened. The HOA, the same group that had fined, threatened, and humiliated him, now faced the consequences of their own arrogance. News crews arrived by morning. Cameras panned across the flooded streets, interviewing frantic residents, and when they found Isaiah standing near the old creek line, holding Layla's hand, their lens lingered. Reporters asked what had happened. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the stream of water flowing again, steady and clear, as if nothing had ever been lost. Then he said quietly, "They thought they could bury what was never theirs to control." For the first time, the world was watching, not because of an HOA meeting, not because of property values, but because the truth had finally broken through. And as the cameras rolled and the sun rose over the flooded homes, Isaiah realized something deeper than revenge, deeper than anger. The creek hadn't just returned to wash away their mistakes. It had come back to remind them, you can't concrete over justice. But the question that remained hung heavy in the humid air. Would they finally learn, or just rebuild the same walls again? In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood became a symbol, not of wealth or order, but of what happens when arrogance meets denial. News outlets called it the flooded suburb scandal. City officials launched an investigation. Insurance companies pulled out. And the HOA that once prided itself on maintaining community standards was now drowning in lawsuits and shame. But for Isaiah, it wasn't victory. It was vindication mixed with grief. He walked through the wreckage of streets once manicured to perfection, now cracked and covered in silt. The air still smelled of mud and regret. He watched as crews tore down what remained of the concrete barriers and dredged the creek open again, letting the water flow freely for the first time in months. When it was done, the sound of running water returned, soft, constant, and alive. The same creek his grandfather once fished in, the same one his neighbors tried to bury. It was still there. It had survived. Just like him, but the cost had been heavy. His home was damaged beyond repair. Layla's drawings, family photos, heirlooms, gone. And yet Isaiah felt a strange peace, because what had been destroyed wasn't his identity. It was theirs. Their illusion of control, their facade of perfection built on injustice and exclusion. The cameras eventually left. The HOA dissolved. Neighbors moved away, their dream homes now reminders of what they had done. The land began to heal, grass pushing through cracked pavement, birds returning to the trees. Nature, it seemed, forgave faster than people did. Isaiah rebuilt elsewhere. Smaller house, quieter street, no HOA, no meetings, no warnings disguised as courtesy. He planted a small garden out back and made sure there was water nearby, flowing and unchained. Every morning he'd sit with Layla, coffee steaming in his hands, and listen to the creek. It was a reminder of loss, yes, but also of endurance. And yet the story didn't end there. Because it was never just about a creek. Isaiah's story echoed far beyond his neighborhood. His case became a study in how environmental racism hides in plain sight, how rules and property values can be used to erase history, silence voices, and destroy what doesn't fit into the picture of comfort some people want to preserve. Activists began citing his story in town halls, universities, and online forums. People shared clips of the news coverage with captions like, "This is what systemic racism looks like when it wears a suit and tie." It wasn't loud or obvious. It was buried in paperwork, HOA bylaws, and community improvement projects. And slowly, people began to see the truth, that racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through policies. Sometimes it pours from cement trucks in broad daylight. Isaiah never sought fame, never gave long interviews. But one journalist who revisited the story months later found him by his rebuilt home. She asked what lesson he hoped people would take away. He paused, looked out toward the water, and said quietly, "They tried to bury the creek because it didn't fit their design. But what they didn't understand is, what's natural always finds a way back." Those words spread like ripples, quoted under photos of the destroyed subdivision, a haunting metaphor for more than just one community. Because the truth is, what happened there wasn't unique. Across the country, across the world, history keeps repeating itself. People trying to cover what they don't want to face. People punished for simply existing in spaces they're told they don't belong. Isaiah's story became a mirror, reflecting not just his pain, but the collective cost of pretending racism is gone because it's hidden behind policy or polite smiles. The creek runs again, steady and unbothered. But the question it leaves behind still cuts deep. How many more voices, histories, and lives will we try to bury before we learn that what we silence always finds a way to rise again?